China claims it's ready to dethrone U.S. air power. It has a sleek, menacing 6th-generation fighter jet that's supposedly about to change everything. At least that's what they're saying. But is the hype real, or is it just smoke and mirrors? On today's episode of the Infographics Show, we're explaining why China's new fighter jet actually sucks. Beijing has a new toy, the J-36 fighter. When the first grainy images appeared in late 2024, it had defense analysts asking questions. Was it real? Was it a mock-up? And then, just to make sure everyone was paying attention, clearer photos and even videos of it flying over Chengdu, China's Area 51 equivalent, dropped in 2025. And it was a stunner. This wasn't just another J-20 knockoff, instead it was a radical leap, a tailless design which is incredibly hard to get right, a massive diamond-shaped double delta wing spanning an estimated 49 to 59 feet. The whole thing was a smooth-flowing piece of geometry, screaming stealth. Analysts at the U.S. Air Force's Foreign Technology Division started running the numbers and came up with a radar cross-section of less than 0.01 square feet. To a radar, that's about the size of a marble. Then there were the engines, 3 engine inlets tucked away in the stealthy frame. This tri-jet configuration, likely for powerful variable cycle engines, looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. It was a design so aggressive, so futuristic, it made a lot of current-gen fighters look like museum pieces. The internet naturally exploded. Publications like The Warzone and Interesting Engineering jumped on it instantly. Forums lit up. YouTubers rushed out breakdowns asking if it was a head fake or the real deal, pulling in 50,000 views in hours. China's state-backed SCMP was happy to fan the flames, touting it as a world beater. The most impressive or terrifying part? The speed. China had gone from initial grainy sightings to a tweaked, more stable, more maneuverable prototype in just 10 months. It worked. The hype went straight to the top. In January 2025, U.S. Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall, the man in charge of America's own 6th-gen program, NGAD, stood in front of Congress and gave them the bad news. China, he warned, might beat us to the punch. He used the J-36's Mach 2 Plus potential and its rumored integration with loyal wingman drones as a budget-requesting missile. And it hit its target. The U.S. defense budget debate suddenly had a new, sleek, diamond-winged boogeyman. The J-36 had done its job before it even entered service. It caused a panic. But while the flashy design grabs the headlines, the real disaster lies in the engines, where China's tech gaps could ground this jet before it ever takes off. Stick around to see how decades of engine woes might turn the Supremacy Challenger into a hangar decoration. When you start digging into what makes a 6th-generation fighter actually 6th gen, the J-36's resume starts to look a little thin. It's a classic case of fake it till you make it, but the making it part is hitting a very real, very expensive wall. Independent analysts, the ones who get paid to read the fine print, took a hard look at the J-36 in 2025 and concluded that most of its revolutionary features are, to put it kindly, speculative. That's analyst speak, for they're making it up as they go along. A true 6th-gen fighter isn't just a stealthy airframe. It is a flying supercomputer, a network hub, and an engine technology miracle all in one. And on every single one of those fronts, the J-36 is failing. Let's start with the big one, stealth. That smooth, tailless frame is great, but real 6th-gen stealth isn't just about the shape, it's about broadband stealth, metamaterials that can absorb 99% of radar waves across all kinds of frequencies, not just the X-band that everyone already plans for. That kind of tech is ridiculously hard to manufacture, and there is zero evidence China has cracked it. Then there's the brain. A 6th-gen jet needs quantum-resistant computing to process threats in real time, fusing data from a dozen different sensors at once. China's coverage talks a big game, but the system's supposed 10 to the 15th power operations per second only works on paper, and only if their homegrown chips can actually keep up. And those are the same domestic chipsets that are still vulnerable to U.S. export controls. A March 2025 commentary from the RUSI think tank pointed out that without a reliable supply of high-end chips, the J-36's brain is permanently handicapped. But the real issue is in the performance. The hype-promised hypersonic missiles, the PL-XX series supposedly reaching Mach 5 at 186 miles and sustained Mach 2 Plus supercruise without afterburners. And this is where it all falls apart. Critics pointed out the obvious. Flying at Mach 2 for more than a few minutes turns the plane into a blast furnace. The skin temperature can exceed 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. To survive that, you need advanced ceramic composites, the kind of space-age materials China still imports. Without them, the plane's own speed will melt its stealth coating right off. And those engines, the ones meant to deliver the revolutionary supercruise, they're not revolutionary at all. They're placeholders. The J-36 prototypes are suspected to be flying on interim engines, either the WS-15 or a modified WS-19. A September 2025 Flight Global report tore this apart, noting that even those best Chinese engines only get a thrust-to-weight ratio of about 9:1. That sounds good until you hear the US's F-35 engine, the Pratt & Whitney F-135, hit an 11:1 ratio, and that is a 5th-gen engine. Then there's the optionally unmanned part. This is a core 6th-gen idea. The pilot can fly it, or an AI can. Experts dismiss this as years away for China. It requires an AI with 99.999% reliability, fault-tolerant, unhackable, and smarter than a human pilot. China's autonomous algorithms are still playing catch-up to US DARPA projects from 5 years ago. So what do we have? We have a plane that can't fly as fast as it claims, can't think as fast as it needs, and it can't even be built with the materials it requires. It's a 6th-gen body with a 5th-gen engine and a 4th-gen brain. And if those unproven features sound bad, wait until we dive into the engine crisis. Data shows China's jet power plants are still plagued by failures that could cripple the entire program. If there is one single reason this entire multi-billion-dollar program is destined to fail, it is this: engines. China's aviation engine industry isn't just years behind the Western peers, it is on a completely different planet. It is the program's Achilles heel, its white whale, and its great, screaming, embarrassing bottleneck all rolled up into one. And it's not for lack of trying. Beijing knows this is a problem. Under the Made in China 2025 initiative, they have shoveled more than $20 billion since 2015 at this problem. They have poached engineers, stolen blueprints, and built entire cities dedicated to aerospace innovation. And it has, by and large, been a spectacular failure. A November 2025 report from the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission evaluating the program's shortcomings confirmed what everyone already knew. You can't just buy or steal your way into a reliable jet engine. It's just too hard. The metallurgy is too precise, the tolerance is too small, and the physics is too unforgiving. The WS-10 engine, which powers China's top-tier J-20 fighter, is a notorious hangar queen. A May 2025 analysis from Turbly found its mean time between failures is just 300 to 500 hours. That means, on average, a pilot has to fly with the constant knowledge that his engine is going to try to kill him every 300 hours. For comparison, the Western equivalent, the GE F-414, which powers the Super Hornet, has an MTBF of over 1,000 hours, and that is an older design. Now apply this to the J-36. The new radical tri-jet design doesn't just need an engine, it needs a miracle engine. It needs a variable cycle engine that can be both a high-thrust monster for combat and a fuel-saving marathon runner for patrol. China doesn't have one. They're pinning all their hopes on the underdeveloped WS-19. This is the engine that's supposed to make the J-36 a 6th-gen marvel. One problem: it doesn't work. A report from Berkeley's Open Computing Facility noted that a miniature turbojet variant of the WS-19 failed its first flight test in November 2025. It literally could not get off the ground. So the J-36, the plane that made Frank Kendall and Congress panic, is flying on a prayer. Back in July 2025, Interesting Engineering published an article about a new superalloy cooling tech that lets Chinese turbines tolerate over 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit. And that was just a classic propaganda move. Show off a shiny new technology in the lab and hope nobody asks about mass production. China's entire industrial base, with all that $20 billion, can only churn out 20 to 30 of those advanced engines per year. The US pumps out over 100 proven high-performance engines annually. You can't build a 6th-gen Air Force with 20 engines a year. To make it all worse, geopolitics is strangling the program. Western sanctions are blockading key materials like rhenium alloys. Rhenium is what gives modern turbine blades the superhuman strength to spin at 20,000 RPM without turning into molten slag. Without it, China's best alloys have a 20 to 30% performance deficit in durability. So what does this all mean for the J-36? It means it is permanently nerfed. It won't get its Mach 2+ supercruise. It'll be lucky to hold Mach 1.5. It won't get its 1,500 nautical mile range. That'll be slashed by 25%. It'll be less of a long-range predator and more of a short-leash guard dog. It'll be heavier, slower, and hotter than it's supposed to be, making it an easier target. Engines are just the tip of the iceberg. The system integration nightmare could make this jet a sitting duck in modern warfare. And here's the part of the 6th-gen puzzle that Beijing doesn't really want you to think about. It's not just about one plane. The entire concept of 6th-generation warfare isn't just about a better fighter jet. It's about a system of systems. It's a wolf pack. The central fighter, the J-36 in this case, is just the alpha. It's supposed to be the quarterback, in real-time command of the swarm of AI-enabled loyal wingman drones. We're talking about one pilot controlling up to 50 other aircraft. like the GJ-11 drone. Some are flying ahead to sniff out radar, some are carrying extra missiles, some are designated to take a hit. To do this, the J-36 doesn't need to just be a plane, it needs to be a flying data center. It needs to fuse data from 360-degree sensors, processing 1 petabyte of mission data every single mission, the equivalent of streaming 1,000 high-def movies in one sortie. It also needs to instantly share that data with its drone swarm, with satellites, with ground command, and with the hypersonic weapons it's launching. It's an incredibly complex, seamless, unhackable, instantaneous data-sharing orchestra, and China's J-36 isn't just late to rehearsal, it doesn't even know what instrument it's supposed to play. Chinese state media, in a rare moment of honesty, had an SCMP article in March 2025 admit that these system-of-system concepts are in the early conceptual testing phase. There have been 0 full-scale integration demonstrations. They haven't even proven that the plane can talk to the drones, let alone command them in a high-G dogfight. The whole thing is speculative. A recent January 2025 analysis from SOFREP drove this home by listing everything we don't know, which is basically everything. Let's start with propulsion. The best guess is they're using Russian-derived AL-41F engines as a crutch, which hardly screams next generation. But the real joke is in the mission systems, which are dangerously behind on cybersecurity. A NIST benchmark comparison found China's systems have a staggering 15% higher vulnerability to hacking than their US counterparts. A system of systems that can be hacked isn't just a weapon, it's a liability. You don't want your billion-dollar drone swarm to suddenly decide you are the target, and it doesn't stop there. Those advanced composites for the airframe, they're still imported. China can't produce them at scale, so they're paying a 40% premium just to get the materials. This inflates the cost of the entire program, a program that, as far as anyone can tell, remains completely imaginary. It's a house of cards built on foreign parts and insecure networks. But the real monster is the AI. To run a 50-drone swarm with 95% autonomy, you need an AI that's beyond cutting edge, and that AI needs chips. And this is where the US sanctions really bite. As Forbes reports, China's best chipmaker, SMIC, is stuck on 7-nanometer nodes. That is 2 to 3 generations behind the industry leader, TSMC, and you can't run 6th-gen AI on 5th-gen chips. It's like trying to run Cyberpunk 2077 on a PlayStation 3. It's going to be slow, it's going to lag, and it's going to crash at the worst possible moment. The national interest summed it up perfectly in November 2025. While the J-36's latest design tweaks did improve its yaw stability, its overall sensor fusion technology is stuck at US 2010s levels. In a real fight, the J-36 pilot won't be a godlike quarterback. He'll be an overwhelmed office worker drowning in data with a 50-plus millisecond lag frantically trying to stop his drones from flying into each other. So the J-36 is a pretty shell with a bad engine and a non-existent brain. But surely China's brute-forced industrial model can fix that, right? They'll just throw another $20 billion at it. Well, they're running out of the one thing you can't buy: time. That early conceptual testing line wasn't just an accident, it was an admission. And it's a disaster for China's strategic timeline. Official PLA sources trying to manage expectations confirmed in 2025 that the J-36 is still in prototype validation at secretive bases. The War Zone reported in November 2025 that the first real flights with systems actually on board probably won't happen until 2026 or 2027. This is a massive delay from the optimistic 2024 projections that caused the original panic. This creates a vulnerability gap. U.S. Air Force Chief General David Alvin, in a 2025 briefing, laid out the new reality. China may be ahead and showing off a timeline, but they are critically behind in maturity. Here's the race as it stands, and it's not even close. China is in a desperate sprint to shove its J-36 fighter into Initial Operational Capability, or IOC, by 2030. But let's be clear about what that means. IOC is a political milestone, not a performance one. Usually just a handful of barely functional airframes rushed to a frontline unit for sake of a PR win. The United States, with its NGAD F-47 program, isn't even targeting first fights until 2028. Why the delay? Well, because the US is building a revolutionary weapon, not a parade float. The NGAD subsystems are already proven. The revolutionary adaptive cycle engines work. The advanced sensors are tested. The heavily encrypted data links are secure. The hard numbers don't lie. A September 2025 overview from Aviation A to Z noted that China only has 2 known prototypes flying, the J-36 and another testbed called the JXDS. Meanwhile, the US NGAD program already has 5 or more demonstrators in the air, testing all the different parts of the system of systems: the loyal wingmen, the data hubs, and the new weapons. This 3 to 5 year gap before the J-36 is even remotely combat ready isn't just an inconvenience, it's a massive target sign on China's back. and opponents are already lining up to exploit it. First, the cyber vulnerabilities. That hackability rate isn't hypothetical. In a 2025 RAND wargame, Chinese military networks were breached in roughly 1 out of every 7 scenarios. That's not a glitch. It's a structural failure point. Second, the training gaps. Even if the plane was perfect, the pilots aren't ready. PLA pilots average a meager 150 flight hours per year. Their U.S. Air Force counterparts get over 200 hours. And those hours are spent in complex, realistic, multi-domain training environments, not just flying circles. You can't fake experience. So for the next 5 to 7 years, China is stuck. They've shown their hand with a flashy prototype, but they've got nothing to back it up. They've started a race that they can't finish, all while their pilots and systems fall further behind. Even these timelines mask the deeper rotting problems. The industrial base is crumbling under bottlenecks that could turn this jet into a multi-billion-dollar flop. The next part uncovers the supply chain chaos that is the ultimate nail in the coffin. This is the last nail in the coffin. It's the one that seals the J-36's fate and buries it. Even if the engineers were geniuses, the engines were reliable, and the software was ready, the J-36 still wouldn't work. Why? Because you can't build a 21st century fighter fleet on a 20th century industrial base. China's $150 billion aerospace sector, for all its bluster, isn't sustainable. It's a system built on staggering investment and copied designs, but it lacks the deep institutional knowledge and resilient supply chains that complex manufacturing requires. It's a facade, and the J-36 is the project that is finally exposing the cracks. An August 2025 Yikai Global Report laid out the bottlenecks, and they are catastrophic. The entire Chinese military-industrial complex can only produce 50 to 100 high-performance engines annually for all its planes. To build a meaningful J-36 fleet, they need over 200 new engines just for that single program every single year. The math doesn't just not work, it's impossible. To build the J-36, they must cannibalize the engine supply for their J-20s, J-16s, and the rest of their Air Force. It's a strategic zero-sum game that they've already lost. The Ukraine war wrecked global supply chains. Key specialized materials, especially the titanium alloys needed for high-stress airframes, are delayed by 6 to 12 months. You can't accelerate development when you're waiting a year for the basic metal to build the wings. In the world of 5th-gen development, a 12-month pause isn't just a delay, it's a regression. You are falling further behind a competitor who is iterating and upgrading in real time. Then there's the workforce. China has a huge and widely reported engineer shortage. They have about 300,000 skilled aerospace engineers. The US has over 500,000. This isn't just a numbers game, it's an experience and quality control nightmare. The US workforce has decades of institutional knowledge in maintaining complex stealth fleets. China's workforce is learning as they go. They simply don't have the people to design, build, troubleshoot, and fix these hyper-complex systems at scale. If you want a perfect proxy for failure, a case study of how fundamentally broken this all is, stop looking at the J-36 and look at the C919. That's China's total reset commercial jet, their national priority answer to Boeing and Airbus. This is their #1 civilian aerospace goal, the project with unlimited state backing. Yet in 2025, as SCMP reported in November, it fell a staggering 40% short of its own delivery goals. They targeted 150 planes and they delivered around 90. This was supposed to be the easy one. And the C919 doesn't even use Chinese engines. It runs on Western LEAP 1C engines from CFM. Let that sink in. China's industrial base can't even hit its modest production targets when it's using its rivals' engines to do it. Now add in the US export bans, which Forbes calculated have inflated program costs by a crippling 25 to 30%. The USCC evaluation from November 2025 said it all. The Made in China 2025 aviation goals have fallen short. They aimed for 80% self-sufficiency and they hit 60. This is the rotten foundation the J-36 is built on. So what's the verdict? The J-36 is a PR victory and a strategic disaster. Mass production will be delayed likely until 2035, at which point the US NGAD will already be in the sky, making the J-36 obsolete before it even arrives. The J-36 will arrive late, over budget and underpowered. It's not a dethroning of the West, it's a multi-billion-dollar disappointment. A shiny, hollow spectacle, and the perfect example of why hype, propaganda, and brute force spending can't ever beat physics. Now go watch America's 2-day war plan that terrifies China, or click on this video instead.